The world he built is mine now, Mom. You were just part of the scenery. When my daughter Chloe said those words over my husband's fresh grave, I didn't argue. I just packed my life away like the devoted wife I had always been. But 3 days later, sitting in a dusty lawyer's office, I discovered that my gentle Arthur had orchestrated a masterpiece of revenge from beyond the grave. My daughter thought she had inherited a kingdom, but she was about to learn a brutal lesson. You can't evict the queen from the castle she helped build. Just 3 months ago, my world was still intact, a carefully constructed life built over 45 years of marriage. I was Evelyn Crawford, a wife to a man I adored, and a mother to a daughter I thought I knew. Arthur was my anchor, a quiet, steady man whose presence filled our sprawling suburban home with a sense of unshakable peace. He had built a successful consulting firm from the ground up, and while he handled the world of finance and contracts, I handled the world within our walls. I orchestrated the dinner parties, managed the household, and raised Chloe to be his shining star. When he suffered a sudden, fatal stroke at the age of 72, the silence he left behind was a deafening roar that I thought would consume me entirely. My world didn't just end. It shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. In the midst of that disorienting grief, Chloe arrived. She swept into the quiet house, not like a daughter mourning her father, but like a CEO conducting a corporate takeover. Dressed in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my first car, her grief was perfectly curated, her tears tasteful and brief. She cooed about how difficult this must be for me, her voice a polished symphony of counterfeit sympathy. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this huge place all by yourself," she'd said, her perfectly manicured hand sweeping across the mahogany banister Arthur had so loved. All the upkeep, the stairs, the constant reminders, it's just not healthy for you right now. I should have seen the glint of acquisition in her eyes, the cold appraisal that lingered on every piece of art, every silver frame. I should have recognized the ambition that lurked beneath the veil of concern. Chloe had always been Arthur's darling, the brilliant daughter who graduated with honors and married Brandon, a sharp-witted investment banker with a predatory smile. Arthur had poured his pride into her, celebrating every achievement, funding every new venture. I was the backdrop to their vibrant lives. The woman who ensured the pot roast was perfectly cooked and the garden was always in bloom. I was the quiet, steady rhythm of the home, and I had foolishly believed that made me essential. After the funeral, Chloe's suggestions became more insistent, more urgent. She and Brandon would come over for dinners, their conversations circling back to my situation with the persistence of sharks. They'd spread glossy brochures for luxury senior living communities across the dining room table, their bright photos a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled over my life. "Look at this one, Mom," Brandon would say, pointing to a picture of smiling seniors playing bingo. "They have a pool, group activities, and a dedicated nursing staff. You'd have zero responsibilities." What they truly meant was that they would have zero responsibilities. They saw me not as a grieving mother, but as an inconvenient tenant living on prime real estate. They saw my home not as a sanctuary of memories, but as a multi-million-dollar asset waiting to be liquidated. The pressure was subtle at first, a gentle current of persuasion, but it soon became a relentless tide. They spoke of property taxes, of the difficulty of finding reliable handymen, of the loneliness I must be feeling in such a large, empty house. Every word was a carefully sharpened tool designed to pry me from the foundations of my own life, to make me feel like a burden in the very home I had created. The final, brutal severing happened last Wednesday. I had been adrift in the house for 2 months since Arthur's passing, a ghost in my own life, sleeping in the guest room because the scent of him still lingered on the pillows in our master bedroom. Chloe arrived without calling, Brandon trailing behind her like a loyal lieutenant, both of them carrying large, expensive-looking suitcases. "Mom, "We've made an executive decision," Chloe announced, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Brandon's firm is expanding its downtown office, and the commute is killing him. It just makes sense for us to move in here. This house is perfect for us and the kids." I stared at her, the words failing to form a coherent thought in my fog of grief. "Move in? But Chloe, this is my home. This is where your father and I." Her mask of compassion didn't just slip, it shattered. For the first time, I saw the unvarnished greed that had been driving her all along. "Actually, Mom," she said, her tone as cold and hard as marble, according to Dad's will, "I inherit everything. The house, the investment portfolio, all of it." The air left my lungs in a painful rush. "No," I whispered. "There must be a mistake. Your father, he would never." Chloe let out a short, dismissive laugh. "No mistake. Dad was a smart man. He knew I'd be a better steward of his legacy than you ever could be. You never understood his business, his finances. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 45 years of partnership, of love, of shared dreams, all reduced to a footnote in my own life story." And that's when she delivered the words I'd recalled in the hook. The words that would echo in my mind for days. "The world he built is mine now, Mom. You were just part of the scenery." I packed my life in a stunned, silent haze. 45 years of marriage, of raising a child, of building a home, all compressed into 2 worn suitcases and a cardboard box filled with photographs. Chloe stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, glancing at her designer watch, as if my heartbreak was an inconvenience to her schedule. "There's a decent extended stay motel over on Route 7, she offered, with all the warmth of a GPS navigator. "I'm sure you can get a weekly rate." My own daughter, who was about to inherit an estate worth over $30 million, was suggesting I check into a place where the carpets were sticky and the towels were paper thin. Brandon, to his credit, couldn't quite look me in the eye as he loaded my suitcases into the trunk of their shiny black SUV. "You'll enjoy the freedom, Evelyn," he mumbled, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "No more worrying about a leaky roof or a broken furnace. No more home," is what he meant. As they drove me away, I watched the house, my house, Arthur's house, now Chloe's house, shrink in the rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a painful speck. I had poured my soul into those walls, and now I was being disposed of like yesterday's garbage, driven to a budget motel by the very person I had given life to. The place Chloe had chosen for my exile was called the Royal Crest Motel. The name was a cruel joke, a parody of luxury in a world of cracked asphalt and flickering neon. The only thing royal about it was the faded purple of its threadbare carpet, which smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and industrial strength cleaner. The walls were so thin I could hear the man in the next room coughing, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to echo the hollowness in my own chest. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest, and stared at the 3 $100 bills Chloe had pressed into my hand before she drove away. "This should hold you over for a week or two," she'd said, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "It will give you some time to get your affairs in order." $300. A pittance, a tip for the woman who had spent 45 years building the life Chloe was so eager to claim. After Chloe and Brandon left, a profound and terrifying silence descended. For 2 months, the silence in my home had been about grief, about the absence of Arthur. But this silence was different. This was the silence of erasure, of being utterly and completely alone, discarded. In the span of an afternoon, I had transitioned from a grieving widow in a comfortable home to a homeless senior citizen in a roadside motel. The woman I had rocked to sleep, the child whose fevers I had soothed, had looked me in the eye and calmly severed me from my own life. She had taken my home, my security, and my dignity, leaving me with nothing but a box of photographs and a future that felt like a terrifying, blank void. I tried to process the sheer brutality of it, but my mind refused to cooperate. It felt like a nightmare, a surreal distortion of reality from which I would surely wake up. But the cheap, scratchy blanket under my fingertips and the buzzing of the faulty overhead light were undeniable truths. This was my new reality. As the hours bled into one another, something began to stir beneath the thick fog of shock and grief. It was a small, insistent thought, a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. I thought about Arthur. My husband had been a man of almost obsessive precision. He arranged his books by genre and then alphabetically by author. His closet was a testament to order, with shirts organized by color and shoes polished and aligned in perfect rows. This was a man who planned everything, who created contingency plans for his contingency plans. He was meticulous about his affairs, especially important documents. The idea that he would leave behind a will so careless, so cruel, felt fundamentally wrong. It was a discordant note in the symphony of the man I had known for nearly half a century. The man who had held my hand through the long, painful months of my father's illness, who had once driven 200 miles in a snowstorm just to bring me a specific brand of tea he knew I loved, that man would not leave me destitute. Then, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was from about 5 years ago, a quiet Sunday afternoon. Arthur had called me into his study, a room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. He had a document spread out on his large oak desk. It was his will. He had sat me down, not with the condescending air of a man explaining complex matters to a simple woman, but with the patient tone of a loving partner ensuring his other half was secure. "Evelyn," he had said, his gaze serious and direct, "I want you to understand this completely. This house is yours. It's our home, but it is your fortress. No one, not even Chloe, can ever take it from you. Everything we've built, it's for your security." He had tapped a specific clause on the page. 70% of the liquid assets, the entire property, all of it is for you. Chloe is well provided for, but you are the priority. You are my legacy. The memory was so vivid it felt like I was back in that room, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. That conversation, that promise, was the absolute antithesis of the cold, dismissive document Chloe had described. The two realities could not coexist. One of them was a lie. A new feeling began to displace the grief. A cold, sharp-edged anger. I had been played, manipulated by my own daughter during the most vulnerable moment of my life. The grief was still there, a deep, aching wound. But now it was accompanied by a steely resolve. I would not fade away in this sad, lonely room. I would not become the useless, discarded woman Chloe believed me to be. I would find out the truth. The next morning, I used the motel's spotty Wi-Fi on my old tablet to look up the name of Arthur's attorney, a man we had used for decades for everything from buying our first home to handling the legal aspects of Arthur's firm, Harrison Gable. His office was downtown, in the heart of the financial district, a world away from my current bleak surroundings. The 20-minute bus ride would cost me $5 precious from my meager funds, but it felt like the most important investment I could possibly make. It was an investment in the truth, an investment in the memory of the man I loved. The law office of Gable and Stern was everything the Royal Crest Motel was not. It was a sanctuary of quiet dignity, with plush carpets that muffled every footstep, walls lined with leather-bound books, and the faint, pleasant scent of wood polish. When I gave my name to the receptionist, she looked at me with polite confusion, but typed it into her system. A moment later, a distinguished man in his early 70s, with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, emerged from a back office. "Evelyn?" Harrison Gable said, his voice a mixture of warmth and genuine surprise. "My dear, I am so glad to see you. I was beginning to worry. I've called the house a dozen times, But Chloe kept insisting you were traveling abroad, on a cruise, to find yourself after Arthur's passing. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that for a moment I could only stare at him. Traveling abroad. My daughter had not only cast me out, she had erased my very existence to those who might question her actions. "Mr. Gable," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "That's not true. I haven't been anywhere." I took a deep breath and laid out the sordid story Chloe's claim about the will, her moving into my house, the $300, the motel. As I spoke, Harrison Gable's expression shifted from friendly concern to puzzlement, and then to outright alarm. "Evelyn, that's impossible," he said, his voice losing its gentle tone and taking on an urgent edge. "We had the will reading 3 weeks ago. You were supposed to be there. Chloe called me the day before, saying you were utterly distraught and had empowered her to handle everything on your behalf. She swore she would make sure you received your full inheritance and were well cared for." My stomach plummeted, the cold dread washing over me in a sickening wave. I had not just been lied to. I had been the victim of a meticulously planned conspiracy. "Harrison," I whispered, the name of the old friend coming more naturally than his formal title. "I was never told about any reading. Chloe told me she inherited everything, that I was left with nothing." Without another word, Harrison turned and strode purposefully to a massive filing cabinet. His movements were no longer those of a semi-retired lawyer, but of a man on a mission. He pulled out a thick file folder with our family name, Crawford, stamped on the tab. "Margaret, what your daughter has described is a complete fabrication," he said, placing the file on his large desk. He opened it and pulled out a heavy document bound in a blue cover. I recognized Arthur's neat, deliberate signature at the bottom of the front page, witnessed and notarized. "Your husband's final will and testament is very, very specific," he said, his eyes scanning the page before he looked up at me, his expression a mixture of fury and pity. "And I can assure you, it does not leave you with nothing. It leaves you with nearly everything." Harrison Gable slid the heavy document across the polished surface of his desk. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my fingertips tracing the familiar shape of Arthur's signature. It was real. This was the truth. "Read it yourself, Evelyn," Harrison said, his voice a low, steady anchor in my swirling sea of emotions. He pointed to a specific paragraph, and I began to read the words my husband had left for me. "I, Arthur James Crawford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Evelyn Crawford, the following." My eyes scanned the legal text, my mind struggling to absorb the magnitude of what it said. "Our primary residence at 1821 Willow Creek Lane, including all furnishings and personal effects, was mine. Additionally, I was to inherit 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, a sum totaling, as the document specified, approximately $24.5 million. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it seemed unreal. My head started to spin, the words blurring together on the page. Harrison's finger guided me to the next section. "To my daughter, Chloe Crawford Hayes, I leave the remaining 30% of my estate, a sum of approximately $10.5 million. I felt a brief, confusing pang of something not pity, but a sad acknowledgement of what could have been. But then Harrison directed my attention to the final, devastating sentence of the clause. "This sum is to be held in trust, with distributions to begin on her 40th birthday, and is entirely contingent upon her demonstrating continued respect, love, and care for her mother following my death. Should she fail in this familial duty, as determined by the executor of my estate, her entire inheritance shall be forfeited and revert to her mother, Evelyn Crawford." I looked up from the page, my eyes meeting Harrison's. He didn't need to say a word. We both knew. Arthur had seen it. Somehow, in his quiet, observant way, He had seen the rot that had taken root in our daughter's soul. He had known exactly what she was capable of. He knew, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I then recounted the entire sordid tale to Harrison. Every detail of the past 48 hours, Chloe's cold dismissal, Brandon's averted eyes, the crushing humiliation of being dropped at the Royal Crest Motel with $300. As I spoke, a deep, crimson flush crept up Harrison's neck, his kind eyes hardening with a righteous fury. "Evelyn, what your daughter has done is not just a moral failing," he said, his voice tight with anger. "It is a cascade of felonies. We are talking about elder abuse, fraud, and the use of forged legal documents to deprive you of your rightful inheritance. She didn't just lie to you. She committed serious crimes against you." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "That contingency clause Arthur included? He updated this will 8 months ago. He told me he was concerned about Chloe's sense of entitlement and Brandon's questionable business ethics. He called this clause a character test, and your daughter has failed it in the most spectacular fashion imaginable." The full, staggering reality of the situation finally settled upon me. Chloe's greed had not only been her motivation, it had been her downfall. In her haste to grab everything, she had triggered the very mechanism designed to protect me from her, costing herself over $10 million in the process. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Harrison's expression softened, but his eyes gleamed with a predatory fire I had never seen before. "I'm saying your daughter just disinherited herself. You are not the beneficiary of a $24.5 million estate, Evelyn. You are the sole inheritor of the entire $35 million estate, plus the house and all personal property." For the first time since Arthur's death, a feeling other than grief or shock took hold of me. It was a cold, clear, and powerful resolve. "What do we do now?" I asked, and this time, my voice did not tremble. Harrison Gable's law office instantly transformed from a place of condolence into a command center for what he cheerfully dubbed Operation Reclaim. He was a man reborn, moving with the energy and precision of a general commanding a battlefield. His first call was to a contact in the district attorney's office, a man he'd known for 30 years. He laid out the case in concise, brutal terms. Within 10 minutes, he was speaking with Detective Isabella Miller, a woman in the Elder Fraud Division whose sharp, no-nonsense tone on the speakerphone was immensely reassuring. She promised to look into it immediately, asking for copies of both the real will and any information I had on the fraudulent one Chloe had mentioned. His next series of calls were to the financial institutions that held Arthur's assets. With the legitimate will and the authority granted to him as executor, he was a force of nature. "Freeze all accounts tied to the estate of Arthur Crawford, effective immediately," he commanded, one after another. "Yes, all of them. We have evidence of felony fraud and illegal appropriation of assets." He explained to me that Chloe and Brandon must have used a sophisticated forgery, likely an older, voided version of the will, to convince the banks to grant them initial access. "They were counting on you being too overwhelmed with grief to question them," he explained, his jaw tight. "They preyed on your vulnerability. It's the classic predator's playbook." As he worked, I thought of Chloe in my house, my beautiful home, probably already making plans for renovations, spending my money on her whims. I pictured Brandon, sitting in his sleek office, calculating how my inheritance would bolster his investment portfolio. They were living in a fantasy world they had constructed through lies and cruelty, completely oblivious to the fact that their world was about to be obliterated. Every call Harrison made was another brick being pulled from the foundation of their stolen kingdom. The trap was now set. The accounts were frozen. The authorities were alerted. All we had to do was wait for the hyenas to realize the watering hole had run dry. It didn't take long. At exactly 3:15 that afternoon, my phone, which had been silent for 2 days, buzzed to life. The screen displayed Chloe's name. I looked at Harrison, who gave me a sharp, confident nod. I answered, putting the call on speaker. "Mom, where are you?" Chloe's voice was sharp, laced with an impatient annoyance that had become her default tone with me. "There's some kind of ridiculous mix-up with the banks. They're saying Dad's accounts are frozen." I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the power shift across the phone line. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and even, a stranger to even my own ears. "I'm sitting in Harrison Gable's office. You remember him, don't you? Arthur's attorney. The one who conducted the will reading you insisted I was too distraught to attend." There was a split second of dead silence on the other end. A silence so profound I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to calculate this new, unexpected variable. "Mom," she finally said, her voice shifting to a tone of deep, patronizing concern. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're clearly confused. The grief has been so overwhelming, and I'm afraid this lawyer is taking advantage of your emotional state." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, cornered, she was trying to gaslight me. "My state has never been clearer, Chloe," I countered, my voice as cold as ice. "I discovered that you are a thief and a liar. I discovered that you forged legal documents and committed fraud. And I discovered that your father was a much, much smarter man than you ever gave him credit for." "That's impossible," she stammered, the panic finally seeping into her voice. "I have the documents. You have forgeries, sweetheart. And thanks to that lovely little contingency clause your father included about treating me with dignity, you don't even have the 10.5 million he actually left you. That's mine now, too." Her breathing became audible, ragged and desperate. "Mom, please," she pleaded, her voice changing again, now slick with the practiced manipulation I knew so well. "Let's just meet somewhere. We can talk about this reasonably. I'm sure we can work something out." A cold, final certainty settled in my chest, extinguishing the last embers of any maternal feeling I had left for her. "Reason left the moment you abandoned me at the Royal Crest Motel. We will talk again, Chloe, in a courtroom." I ended the call and looked at Harrison. He was beaming, a fierce, triumphant smile on his face. The pawn had just taken the queen. After I hung up the phone, a heavy silence settled over Harrison's office. It wasn't the awkward silence of uncertainty, but the profound quiet that follows a decisive, irreversible action. I had not just declared war. I had launched the first, devastating strike. Harrison looked at me, his expression one of deep, professional respect. "He would have been so proud of you, Evelyn," he said softly. Before I could respond, his phone line chimed. It was Detective Miller. "We have more than enough," she stated, her voice crisp and clear through the speaker. "Mr. Gable, the documents you sent, combined with Mrs. Crawford's testimony of the phone call, give us probable cause for a warrant. We'll pick them up this evening. It would be best if they don't have time to coordinate their stories or destroy evidence." Harrison made the final arrangements, organizing for a trusted car service to take me home and a locksmith to meet me there. The thought of returning to the house sent a tremor of both anxiety and fierce determination through me. It was no longer a place of grief. It was a territory to be reclaimed. The story of the arrests came to me later in pieces, a grimly satisfying narrative delivered by Detective Miller. They found Chloe and Brandon at Veritas, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, where they were celebrating their ill-gotten fortune with another couple. According to the detective, Chloe was in the middle of a toast to new beginnings when the plainclothes officers approached their table. Her initial reaction was one of indignant disbelief, her face contorting in a mask of outrage as she was quietly informed she was under arrest. The charade of the composed, elegant socialite shattered, and she began to scream about harassment and false arrest, demanding to call her lawyer a man who, it turned out, specialized in corporate mergers and knew nothing about criminal law. The scene, Miller noted with a hint of dry amusement, caused quite a stir amongst the city's elite. Brandon's downfall was less theatrical but arguably more humiliating. They waited until the next morning to arrest him, securing a separate warrant for his office. They walked into the glass-walled headquarters of his investment firm at 10 a.m. and arrested him in full view of his partners and employees. The forensic accounting team had already traced the digital signature of the forgeries to a software program licensed to his company, a tool he had likely used many times before for less personal projects. He was, Detective Miller informed me, a person of interest in a separate securities fraud investigation, and this blatant, familial crime had just made him a top priority. My son-in-law, the man who had patronizingly explained the basics of a savings account to me a year ago, apparently had a resume of white-collar crime that was about to become public knowledge. While their world was imploding, I was taking my first steps back into mine. The locksmith, a kind man with gentle hands, worked quickly, the sound of the drill biting into the old wood, a strangely therapeutic sound. He handed me a set of new, gleaming brass keys. "All yours, ma'am," he said. The click of the new key in the lock was the sound of a final, definitive victory. I stepped inside, and the air was thick with the ghost of Chloe's presence. Her expensive leather coat was draped over the back of a dining chair, and a cloud of her cloyingly sweet perfume hung in the foyer. The house I had shared with Arthur for 45 years felt alien, violated. I walked directly to the master bedroom, a room I had avoided since Arthur's death. Chloe's things were everywhere, her chaos of designer clothes, shoes, and cosmetics colonizing the space that had once been my sanctuary. A cold, cleansing rage washed over me. This was not a home to be mourned. It was a crime scene to be sanitized. I went to the garage and found a box of heavy-duty black garbage bags. Methodically, silently, I began to purge my daughter from my home. Her silk blouses, her ridiculously expensive handbags, her dozens of makeup palettes, everything was swept from the drawers and closets and into the bags. I worked for over an hour, a silent, focused fury driving me. When I was done, 5 large bags sat in the middle of the room. I dragged them, one by one, down the stairs and left them on the front porch in a neat, insulting row. Let her lawyer figure out how to collect her trash when she made bail. When the last bag was out, I stood in the living room and looked around with new eyes. For the first time, I wasn't seeing Arthur's house or our home. I was seeing my house, and I realized how little of my own taste, my own personality, was reflected in these rooms. The dark, heavy furniture was Arthur's choice. The somber landscape paintings were his preference. I had been the custodian of his vision for so long, I had forgotten I was allowed to have one of my own. That was about to change. The next afternoon, Harrison called with an update. "Bail has been set," he announced. 100,000 for Chloe, $250,000 for Brandon. The judge was not impressed by his existing legal troubles. Since every account they had was now frozen, their ability to pay was non-existent. They were, for the time being, exactly where they belonged. Just as I was processing this news, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number. "Hello, is this Mrs. Evelyn Crawford?" a professional, female voice asked. "My name is Janet Riley. I'm a reporter with Channel 8 News. We've received a tip regarding the arrest of your daughter and son-in-law in a significant elder fraud case." The words sent a chill down my spine. The story was out. In a community as insular and gossip-fueled as ours, the downfall of the golden couple, Chloe and Brandon Hayes, was headline news. "Miss Riley, I appreciate your call, but this is a private family matter," I said, my voice firm. "I have no public statement to make at this time." I expected her to push, but her response was more thoughtful. "I understand this must be an incredibly painful time for you, Mrs. Crawford. she said gently. But a story like yours, it could be a powerful warning. There are so many other seniors who are being manipulated by their own families, people who feel ashamed or powerless to speak up. Your courage could help them recognize the warning signs and find the strength to fight back. She had a point. I thought of the countless other women of my generation, women who had been taught to be agreeable, to keep the peace, to trust their children implicitly. How many of them were being quietly swindled, their life savings siphoned away by the very people they loved most? My personal nightmare could have a public purpose. Let me think about it, Miss Riley, I said, my tone softening. I might have a story to tell after all. After I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I had tended for decades. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The battle was won, but perhaps the war for justice was just beginning. 3 days after the arrests, a fragile sense of order had begun to settle over the house. The scent of Chloe's perfume had finally faded, replaced by the lemon polish I'd used to reclaim the wooden floors and the fresh air drifting through newly opened windows. I was beginning to find a new rhythm, a quiet routine that revolved around my own needs rather than the needs of others. I had my coffee in the morning sun. I spent afternoons sorting through Arthur's book collection. And I slept, for the first time in years, diagonally across the entire master bed. It was in the middle of this newfound peace, on a crisp autumn afternoon, that the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I had only met a handful of times, always at sterile holiday gatherings or charity galas. It was Diana Hayes, Brandon's mother. She stood on my porch with perfect posture, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere suit, her silver hair styled in an immaculate helmet. She radiated the kind of effortless, old-money entitlement that Chloe had always tried so desperately to emulate. I opened the door, my expression neutral. I was no longer the timid, agreeable Evelyn she remembered. "Diana," I said, my voice even. "This is an unexpected surprise." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "Evelyn, my dear, I know this is a difficult time. I was hoping we could have a rational discussion about this unfortunate family situation." I stepped aside and let her in, my curiosity overriding any sense of social obligation. She glided into my living room and settled into one of Arthur's leather armchairs, as if she were granting it an honor. For a few moments, she spoke in platitudes about the shock of it all, the pain it was causing everyone, especially the children. Then, she smoothly transitioned to her true purpose. "Of course, Chloe has always been a rather dramatic girl," she began, delicately repositioning a silk cushion. "Brandon, you know, has always been too loyal for his own good. He was simply trying to support his wife, to protect the family assets. He didn't fully comprehend the legal nuances. The blame shifting was so blatant, so shameless, that I almost had to admire its audacity. She was painting my son-in-law, a seasoned investment banker, as a hapless, love-struck fool who had been led astray by my wicked daughter. "Diana," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her carefully constructed narrative. "Your son is a 40-year-old man with a master's degree in finance. He actively conspired to create forged legal documents to steal my inheritance and leave me homeless. That isn't loyalty. That's a felony." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Semantics, Evelyn. The point is, a public trial will be devastating for everyone. The publicity, the scandal, it serves no one. The Hayes family is prepared to make a settlement that benefits all parties involved. You get your house, your money. Chloe faces the consequences of her poor judgment. And Brandon is allowed to move past this mistake without his career and reputation being destroyed." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she delivered the pitch. "We are prepared to compensate you for your trouble, of course, for the emotional distress and the inconvenience. Let's say $2 million. In a private transfer, all taxes paid. In exchange, You simply informed the district attorney that you believe Brandon was an unwitting participant and that you no longer wish to press charges against him. $2 million. She was offering me a bribe to let her criminal son walk free, to betray the very justice I had fought so hard to set in motion. The offer wasn't just insulting, it was a profound misjudgment of who I had become. My answer is no, I said, my voice quiet, but absolute. This is not about inconvenience, Diana. It's about accountability. Your son is a criminal. He will face the consequences. For the first time, Diana's polished facade cracked. A flash of genuine anger appeared in her eyes before being quickly suppressed. She had come here expecting the mousy, compliant widow from the Christmas parties, not this immovable stranger. She stood up, her composure completely restored, but her aura had shifted from condescending matriarch to something far more menacing. "Very well," she said, her voice now as cold and sharp as glass. "I had hoped you would be reasonable, but you should know, in the interest of preparing a vigorous defense for my son, our legal team has been doing its own due diligence. They've been looking into Arthur's business practices." She paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "They have found some rather significant irregularities. It would be a profound tragedy if your late husband's sterling reputation were to be tarnished in the messy spectacle of a public trial. Sometimes, mud sticks to everyone involved." The threat was unmistakable. If I didn't play by her rules, they would destroy Arthur's memory. They would paint him as a criminal, to make their own son look less guilty. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. This was a line I had never imagined they would cross. Arthur's name, his legacy of integrity, was the one thing I had left of him that felt pure and untouched by all this ugliness. I walked to the front door and opened it. "I think this conversation is over," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Please leave my house." Diana gave a slight, satisfied smile, as if she had just won a crucial point. "Think about it, Evelyn," she said as she walked out. "Sometimes the past is best left buried." As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade of strength I had maintained crumbled. The fear she had intended to provoke washed over me. A cold, sickening wave. Was she bluffing? Or had Arthur, my meticulous, honorable Arthur, been hiding something? The thought was a betrayal of its own, and I hated myself for even entertaining it. But Diana Hayes was not a woman who made idle threats. I went straight to the phone and called Harrison. I recounted the entire conversation, including the $2 million offer and the final, veiled threat. "It's a classic, disgusting tactic, Evelyn," Harrison said, his voice seething with contempt. "They can't win on the facts of their own case, so they try to intimidate the victim by threatening to smear her loved ones. They'll allege anything to create doubt in a jury's mind." "But what if it's not a bluff, Harrison?" I asked, the question I was terrified to voice. "What if there is something there?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Arthur was a brilliant but very private man," Harrison said carefully. "I handled his estate and his corporate filings, but the inner workings of his consulting deals were his own. I have no reason to believe there was anything untoward, but the Hayes family has the resources to dig very, very deep. I knew in that moment that I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I couldn't stand in a courtroom and listen to them slander my husband without knowing the truth for myself. I would not be blindsided. I'm going to find out," I said, my decision solidifying as I spoke. "I'm going through his files. Everything. I need to know what they think they have on him before they have a chance to use it." That night, I walked into Arthur's study, my study now, and pulled the first of many banker's boxes from the shelves. Surrounded by the paper ghosts of my husband's 45-year career, I began to search for a secret I prayed I would never find. The search for truth became a descent into a private hell. For 2 solid days, I barely slept, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a gnawing dread. Arthur's study, once a place of comfort and order, transformed into a chaotic landscape of paper mountains. Dust motes danced in the single beam of my desk lamp as I worked late into the nights, feeling less like a grieving widow and more like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of my own life. I sifted through 45 years of meticulously organized history, and with every file I opened, I felt a piece of my past crumble away. On the surface, it was the story of a successful consultant. But beneath the veneer of legitimate contracts and investment reports, I began to see the shadows Diana had spoken of. There were unsettling patterns. Payments to logistical companies in Panama that had no online presence. Exorbitant consulting fees wired to firms in Macau with vague, undefined services. The discovery that shattered my world came at 3 in the morning on the second day. My fingers, numb and stained with dust, found a slight irregularity in the base of his main filing cabinet. It was a false bottom. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pried it open. Inside, untouched for what looked like years, was a single thick black ledger. This was his real account book, a shadow history of his career. As I turned the pages, my breath hitched in my throat. It was all there, laid out in Arthur's precise, elegant handwriting. A sophisticated, sprawling enterprise of laundering money. Millions of dollars, channeled through a labyrinth of shell corporations, cleaned, and then funneled back into his legitimate-looking investments. I saw names I vaguely recognized from newspaper headlines about organized crime. The scale of it was dizzying, terrifying. My husband, my quiet, honorable Arthur, the man who read poetry to me on Sunday mornings, was a high-level criminal. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the desk to keep from falling. My entire marriage, our entire life, had been a lie, and I had been the oblivious, happy fool living at the center of it. Just as that devastating realization was settling in, my phone, silent on the desk, began to ring. The caller ID was blocked. Mrs. Crawford, a man's voice, slick with the false politeness of a predator, purred through the speaker. "This is Alan Pierce. I represent the Hayes family. I trust you've had some time to reflect on your late husband's extracurricular activities." He didn't wait for me to confirm. "My clients have instructed me to present you with a final, non-negotiable offer. As you've likely discovered, your husband's entire $35 million estate constitutes the proceeds of criminal activity. The federal RICO statutes are quite clear on this. We have enough evidence to prompt an FBI investigation that will lead to the seizure of everything. They will take the house, the bank accounts, the art, right down to the silverware. As the direct beneficiary, you would be considered willfully blind and could even face charges yourself." The lawyer's voice was a droning, monstrous buzz in my ear as he laid out my ruin. "However," he continued, "we are offering you a path through this, a practical solution. You will sign an affidavit stating your belief that Brandon Hayes was misled by his wife and that you wish to drop all charges against him. In return, we will not approach the authorities with our findings. You will be allowed to keep the house and a clean settlement of $5 million. The rest of the assets will be discreetly liquidated and transferred. It's a generous offer, Mrs. Crawford. The only one you will get. You have 24 hours to give us your answer." He hung up. The silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than any I had ever known. They had me. They had found the perfect weapon, and with it, they had destroyed not only my future but my past as well. I spent the next few hours wandering through my house like a ghost, touching the frame of a photograph, running my hand along the back of Arthur's favorite reading chair. Every object was now a monument to a lie. The choice they had given me was a form of torture. Either collaborate with the people who destroyed my family and let them profit from their evil, or lose everything and be branded the wife of a gangster. I sat down at the desk, defeated, and looked at the photo of Arthur and me on our 25th anniversary. His eyes, the kind, steady eyes I had loved for a lifetime, seemed to hold a secret I could now see. But as I stared at his face, another feeling began to burn through the despair, a hot, clarifying rage. Even if Arthur was a criminal, I would not let Chloe and Brandon be the ones to write the final chapter of his story. I would not let them use his sins to launder their own. I would not be extorted. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I picked up the phone. I made a choice. It was not a choice between their two options, but a third, terrifying path of my own making. I dialed Detective Miller. "Detective?" I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I've found something terrible, and I think you'll need to bring the FBI." The next morning, I sat in my own living room, across from Detective Miller and two FBI agents. The senior agent, a calm, serious man named Russo, listened intently as I laid out the entire story, my voice cracking as I confessed my husband's secret crimes. I pushed the black ledger across the coffee table. Agent Russo opened it, his partner, Agent Davies, looking over his shoulder. They scanned the pages, their expressions unreadable. I expected them to be shocked, to start talking about asset seizure. Instead, they exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. "Mrs. Crawford," Agent Russo said, closing the ledger. "What your husband was doing is, as you suspect, a matter of federal jurisdiction. But the crime your daughter and son-in-law are attempting to commit right now, extortion, witness tampering, that is our immediate and primary concern. They believe they have you cornered. We would like your help in allowing them to walk into a trap they've set for themselves. Would you be willing to wear a wire?" There was no hesitation. "Whatever it takes," I said. That evening, the stage was set. I had a tiny, cold piece of metal taped to my chest, a direct link to the FBI agents, sitting in an unmarked van down the street. I called the lawyer, Alan Pierce, and told him I agreed to their terms. An hour later, Chloe and Brandon walked through my front door, out on bail, paid by Diana, their faces alight with smug, triumphant greed. "Mother," Chloe said, the word dripping with false endearment. "I knew you'd see reason." Brandon placed his briefcase on the coffee table and snapped it open. "The documents are all here, Evelyn," he said. "All business. You sign, the charges against me are dropped, and we bury Arthur's unfortunate secrets forever." He was so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he couldn't help but gloat. "You see, it's just simple leverage. We had something you wanted to keep quiet, and you had something we wanted to go away. It's the best deal you were going to get." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I looked him in the eye. "So you are admitting," I said, speaking slowly and clearly for the benefit of my hidden audience, "that you are using my dead husband's alleged crimes to blackmail me into dropping the felony charges you both face?" Chloe scoffed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. It's a family arrangement." Brandon slid the papers and a pen across the table. "Call it whatever you want," he said with a smirk. "Just sign it." Just as my fingers brushed the pen, the living room doors swung open. Agent Russo and Agent Davies entered, calm and imposing. "That won't be necessary," Agent Russo said. "Brandon Hayes, Chloe Hayes, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit extortion and witness tampering." Chloe's face turned white with shock, then purple with rage. As an officer cuffed her, she lunged towards me, her eyes wild. "You old fool!" she screamed. "You've ruined everything. The FBI will take it all now. All that money is dirty, and you'll be left with nothing because of your pathetic pride." She was still shrieking as they led her out of the room. When she was gone, Agent Russo turned back to me. His stern expression softened. "She's wrong about the money, Evelyn," he said gently. He paused, then delivered the words that would rebuild my world. "Your husband's assets are not the proceeds of crime. Mrs. Crawford, Arthur wasn't a criminal. For the past 12 years, he was working for us. Your husband was a confidential informant. The world did not end in the aftermath of that night. It began. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings that laid bare every ugly truth. Chloe and Brandon's defense crumbled under the weight of the FBI's evidence and their own recorded words. They were convicted not only of fraud and elder abuse, but of the far more serious federal charges of attempting to extort a confidential informant's widow. Their arrogance had led them into a trap from which there was no escape. They each received a sentence of 7 to 10 years in federal prison. Diana Hayes and her empty threats vanished, swallowed by the public disgrace of her son's conviction. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I was left standing in the quiet, sunlit landscape of a new life. I sold the house on Willow Creek Lane. It held too many ghosts, both good and bad, and I was no longer a woman who lived in the past. With a portion of my inheritance, I established the Arthur Crawford Foundation for Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal services to elderly individuals facing financial abuse from their own families. It was the perfect way to honor Arthur's true legacy, not as a quiet consultant, but as a secret hero who fought for justice in the shadows. His name would now be a shield for the vulnerable, a purpose I know he would have loved. And for myself, I gave a gift I had denied for 45 years. I re-enrolled in the university I had left to marry him and finally finished my degree in art history. I spend my afternoons in museums now, not in a quiet, empty house. My journey through betrayal and grief taught me a lesson I want to share with every person listening. For so long, my identity was a reflection of others. I was Arthur's wife, Chloe's mother. When they were gone, I thought I was nothing. But the truth is, the most important home you will ever build is the one inside yourself, a place of strength and worth that no one can ever take from you. The best revenge wasn't seeing my daughter in a prison uniform. It was seeing the woman I had become in the mirror, a woman who was resilient, independent, and finally, completely her own. If my story has touched you, please know that you are not invisible, and you are never just anything. You are the author of your own story, and it is never too late to write a new chapter. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and support the channel for more stories of resilience and hope. If you feel comfortable, share a piece of your own story in the comments. Your voice is powerful, and in this community, you are not alone.